All right. A very good afternoon to everyone, and just waiting for everyone to join in so that we can resume our class. Right. So this class is being recorded and will be uploaded on the I think the departmental YouTube channel, so you would have an access to it. Also, I would request you to please switch on your cameras if possible to ensure your attendance. So you may keep yourself muted, but please do switch on your cameras. And I would like you to be seated somewhere where you can focus and pay attention, and would preferably not be multitasking. All right. So yeah, so I ask you to please uh, switch on your camera so that I can mark your attendance, everyone. Just have we're waiting for more students to come in. And if I just have to recapitulate, thank you so much. If I just have to recapitulate from what I did yesterday, remember I have begun the background reading. This is going to be a fast track semester. And I started with the metaphysical poetry, which is your background reading, something that you're already familiar with, something that has been done with you earlier. So I'm trying to work on the background so that your concepts are clear for the future, for the for you know your for your especially when you get into BA sixth and postgraduate level where you would be dealing with the abstract theoretical concept. So we need to build the background right now, and that's the reason why I've been focusing on metaphysical conceit. Now, that is something which is part of your syllabus, right? So, there are still very few students, and I'm hoping more will join in. Sana Khatun, Pinky Bharti, Mohammad Sufyan, Jatin Vajpayee. So I just have 4 students till now. I think we can just wait for more students to join in. Meanwhile, can anyone tell me from what you understood from my previous lecture that I took yesterday, where I deliberated, I discussed with you the concept of conceit. So if I am to ask you only about conceit, and let's not talk about the metaphysical aspect of it, which gets it more complicated, then what do you think a conceit is? What really is a conceit? Yeah, who's going to answer this? I think Jatin. What is a conceit? Can you all hear me? Are you able to hear me or not? Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so good. So if you can hear me, then who is going to tell me about, from what I discussed yesterday, about what conceit is? What is it? Very briefly. Yes, Jatin, tell me. Yes?
Hello. So, ma'am, conceit is a special type of comparison which is done between two very dissimilar objects.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. Which are obviously dissimilar, but then also they are compared to each other.
Okay. And that is that's the ingenuity of it, right? It's not the ingenuity of it, and that is the ingenuity of it. So now what you're telling me is the metaphysical conceit, okay, which is absolutely right. This is what we discussed yesterday. But what, just to begin with, I wanted to know what conceit actually is. How do we understand conceit? It's just a plain English word. So how do we understand conceit? We understand conceit as something which is very egotistical, or something which is full of pride and arrogance, right?
Full of pride.
Exactly. And I wanted to explain to you that how did we really arrive at this meaning of conceit? We arrived with this meaning of conceit. It has to do something with the notion of metaphysical conceit, because as you explain, metaphors, similes, these are figures of speeches which are used to these are artistic expressions, okay, poetic expressions, we can say. And mostly a comparison is always between something which has some likeness to it, or there is some similarity which has been highlighted. Now, as Jatin pointed out, metaphysical conceit is something which is just the opposite. So it is not bringing together the likeness or the similarities of the two objects put together. Rather, it is the absolute, it's unthinkable that you can compare, these two things, like, peaches and pear, or something like absolutely, which has no logical connotation of being compared, with each other. And that's what the metaphysical poetry attempts at. It is the comparison of two dissimilar objects. And it is not, as Helen Gardner pointed out, and I discussed with you yesterday, it is not the justness of the comparison which is very important, and that why are these two dissimilar objects put together, but it is what is striking and arresting is actually the ingenuity of it, that how inventive it is, or how innovative it is to put these things together, that it makes so much of sense. I'm sorry for this. So yeah, coming back to, so this is something that I have done with you yesterday, and also today I thought we're going to pick up metaphysical conceit from Donne's poetry, because we all know that Donne is the pioneer of all this, right? So coming back to, if I have to really look into what conceit is, it's a figure of speech. It can be a simile, a metaphor, and it is obviously very ingenuous and something which is incongruous, or you said dissimilar, which means that there is no similarity between the two. And when there is no similarity between the two things, and yet they are put together, then what happens? Then what will happen? Eventually, it will lead to things like a paradox and contradictions, right? A paradox is again when two contradictory things are being put together. And that's what metaphysical poetry is about. It really brings out the paradox and the contradictions that exist in our lives, and they are being sort of planted from our own lives, real lives instances, and they're put together in the tradition of romantic poetry and also the devotional poetry. Now, this is something which is it's unthinkable. Nothing like this had been attempted before, because if you look at Elizabethan poetry, you look at Spenser, you look at Shakespeare's sonnets, or you look at Sidney, you know that all these follow a very rigid traditional, parameters of romantic poetry, where the beauty of the beloved is being explicated, and you use all figures of speech to describe how the beloved is and how the love is. But in the metaphysical poetry, it is just the opposite. The emphasis is not so much on the emotions or the passions of it, but it is more towards, I should say, the intellectual ability of the poet to actually convince the readers of the comparison, or an argument that he's trying to kind of build up, which he does. So metaphysical conceit is then, of course, associated with the metaphysical poets, the 17th century poets, okay? And it's a very intricate and a very intellectual device, as I've been repeating, again and again. And what is it? It again sets up an analogy, right? An analogy means a comparison between one's entity's spiritual qualities. So a spiritual, that's the reason why they're also called devotional and religious poetry, because there is an analogy or a comparison between the spiritual qualities and the physical world, right? And that becomes more like the whole structure of the poem, right? So if I have to give you an example, and I told you to look for example, which I will ask you. For example, we did presence and absence, and I keep repeating that because we're familiar with it. But what about a valediction forbidding mourning? Okay, this is another one, a very famous one by John Donne. And what is happening here? Here we see the two lovers' souls. is being compared to a draftsman compass, a compass, what is a compass? So souls are compared to the compass. So again, it's a very unlikely comparison, and you wouldn't imagine, what a compass has to do with the lovers or their soul or the eternal commitment to each other. It's very unconventional, so as to say, but he does that, and if I were to just read the lines, and I'm just reading the lines of Benediction Forbidden Mourning, just to give you an example how the conceit works, right? So this one is, if they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul the fixed foot makes no show, to move but doth if the other do. And though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. So you see the connection, that how a compass works, they're the two ends and how they are connected. So the conceits are very far-fetched. Of course, they're stretched. Sometimes it becomes absurd that one can have, like I also gave an example of the flea. How a flea becomes a metaphor, she becomes a symbol of the lovers' union, because it has apparently, it has, kind of sucked the blood of both the lovers. So all that is what we see, right? So if I ask you, has any one of you read, and can you also give me some of the examples, um, or whatever that you have read, a conceit, metaphysical conceit? Anyone? See, this is not the first class of metaphysical conceit. This is probably the third or fourth lecture of metaphysical poetry. I have already discussed with you, um, you know, the introduction and all other details. So now you need to also put in some effort. So I told you to go through some of the Duns poetry and bring out the the conceit used. So has anyone read it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Arisha, tell me.
Ma'am, I have read The Sun Rising.
Okay, excellent.
मैम उसमें जो है सन को एक ओल्ड मैन से कंपेयर किया है
Mm-hmm.
जॉन डन ने.
Okay, and how does he begin it?
मैम उसमें वो ये बोलता है कि मतलब
Sun rising, so dramatic, like it is as if he's talking to the sun. So Arisha, since you picked it up, it's do you remember? Can you recall, if you have the text with you, please read it to us. When he's addressing the sun, I believe he begins by addressing the sun, and that address is very peculiar. Can you read it out to us?
yes,
Yes, Arisha. For the rest of them,
yes
who
ma'am.
haven't read it.
Busy old fool, unruly sun, why
Excellent.
dost thou
That's it.
thus?
Busy, old, unruly sun. So how is sun being described? The sun becomes like a busy. He's old. He's busy because he's like non-stop. He's forever, up there. And unruly. Why is the sun unruly? Sun is unruly because the sun doesn't seem to really respect the privacy of the lovers, and it's just comes up and shines upon the lovers who probably still want to be in their night of love. So this is a very dramatic, again, a very dramatic beginning in many of his poems, especially devotional ones that we will do. You will see it has a very dramatic but a striking beginning. Yes, continue, Arisha.
Yes, ma'am. Why dost thou thus
So what is the
through
conceit
windows?
that you tell us the conceit in this particular one?
Ma'am, जॉन डन कॉल्स द सन बिजी ओल्ड फूल. मैम इसमें वो एक ओल्ड मैन से उसको कंपेयर किया है जो कि मतलब जो सबके बिजनेस में अपनी टांग अड़ाते हैं और सबको सुबह सुबह उठाते हैं आके कि अपने काम करो.
Okay. So, but again, the conceit, I still did not get the conceit. What is that the comparison? Is it only the sun, or is there anything else as the poem progresses? What is the comparison? Okay, since you mentioned it, let's just get this one, sun rising, and let me share the screen with you. See, you have to understand these concepts. I know sun rising is not in your syllabus, but the point is not to just follow the syllabus, but understand what is what has been expected. Basically the concepts. So, where is the metaphysical conceit, the sun rising? Okay, so you said that there is a personification of sun, right? He's busy old fool, right, who seems to be disturbing the lovers in their whatever love making or being together. So how does he continues this argument, Arisha? Because a metaphor, a conceit never stops at one stanza. It is something which is structured, which is developed, which is really it is evolved right from the first stanza to the last stanza. You see certain kind of a development and evolution of it, and towards the end it becomes like a complete case where nobody can argue now against it. Okay, तो वो कैसे इसको develop कर रहे हैं?
मैम आगे भी उन्होंने बताया है कि वो सन से स्ट्रांग है, जबकि ऐसा नहीं है। उन्होंने ऐसा कहा है कि मतलब एक अपनी विंग से ही वो एक्लिप्स और क्लाउड ला सकते हैं।
Exactly. So this is very interesting. This is called hyperbole. Hyperbole and
Yes, ma'am.
exaggeration. Exaggeration. What is hyperbole? Hyperbole is when you बहुत inflated exaggeration आप करते हैं. That is hyperbole. And hyperbole is again part of your metaphysical conceit. Often the conceit, the argument runs, it is so far-fetched that it becomes an exaggerated, idea. Anything that is exaggerated beyond, reasons, it becomes hyperbole. Okay, so how does he brings about eclipse? Tell me that's interesting. How does he brings about eclipse? Can he brings about eclipse? It's a very interesting point that you just mentioned, and I want everyone to really look into it. If you have the text with you, okay, I'm still getting the text. Let me share my screen with all of you. So we can just look at how
Thy beam so reverent and strong, why shouldst thou think I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink?
excellent. Yes, that's what it is. Thy beam so reverent and strong, why shouldst thou think I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink? What do you mean by the wink? It is as if he's trying to say, oh son, you think you're mighty, you're powerful, you have all the strength, you're controlling us. But what happens if I just shut my eyes? You're gone. It's like you do not exist. So he's turning the tables and pretending that you have no power. It is I who give you power. Because when I close my eyes, you do not exist for me anymore, right? So he can eclipse the sun. Sun does get eclipsed. It's a natural phenomenon. We know that it happens, and it doesn't happen every day. It's a rare occasion because of some whatever. Certain the positioning of the sun, earth, and the moon leads to the eclipse. We know that happens, but Dunn is using that phenomena, and he's investing all the power in himself when he says that you think you're powerful, you can disturb us, but what happens when I just shut my eyes? You do not exist. I can eclipse you. So this is what is it. You see that here again, he's using his intellectual wit, hyperbole, and an argument that he's trying to use to convince the power of the lovers, which is over and beyond, sun and any other natural body. So again, it is metaphysical. All right, so you know how he always uses the physical the physical intimacy or the lovers coming together, and how he kind of extrapolate or takes it to the higher level and makes it metaphysical. You know, so here we also see the same thing, and that's what you pointed it out. So all right. So is there anyone else who wants to, who has discussed or read any other and would want us to look into it? Hmm? That was just Arisha, but this was a task for all of you. See, just because we're having an online class, it does not mean that it need not be interactive. We're going to have activities, and I will give you group activities also. So has anyone else read any other John Donne where you found a conceit? It is impossible that you read John Donne and you're not, um, and you don't face with any conceit. You know, this is very typical of Donne's poetry. So, did any one of you attempt to read anything else? Arisha has discussed what she did. What about the rest? Now, I have almost full class with me, but the full class is not in a participatory mode, it seems. Right? All right. So no one has, it seems, prepared. This,
And The Flea by
what?
John Donne, I have
The
read it.
flea, the flea.
The
You're right.
Flea.
The flea, I discussed the flea. So tell me about flea. Yes, Jatin?
Ma'am, John Donne compares the flea,
Mhm.
the bite of a flea, to
Yes.
the union of the lovers.
Exactly.
So,
And how fanciful it is, you know. And the most striking
yes,
part
ma'am.
of it is that Flea is the most unromantic. I mean, it is the most, what should I say? It's a very, I don't know if it's a very repulsive, kind of an image that he's using for something to describe the eternal love. You know, that is why it is the most dissimilar, the most incongruous comparison or the analogy that he's trying to build. So it is the least of romantic poetry. So as I yesterday, I did tell you that with the metaphysical conceit and the metaphysical poetry, we're not only getting into the fact that, I pointed out, I highlighted those two words from Helen Gardner's definition of, one was ingenuity and the other was justness. So the emphasis is not on the justness or how just and how fair, how equitable the comparison is, but the emphasis is on the ingenuity. And from there, I wanted to bring home the point that with the metaphysical poetry, we're really getting into a more innovative, a poetry, a break in the traditional, and the way it has been. Like for example, we have Nastrophil Stella, we did Spencer, and we did all that. So it is strikingly different, refreshing from all that. So this is what I discussed. Anyone else who wants to contribute about what they found out? I have done the introduction and everything. Today was an interactive class where you were supposed to pick up some of the conceits for us to discuss them in the classroom. So I've got two. Is there anyone else who wants to discuss? Why is there utter silence now in my class? I hope everyone has understood. At least you guys have understood. Is that, can I safely assume that these concepts are clear to you? You know, we are going very slow, right? Please, you have to respond. Is it clear to you? Are you following?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
All right, great. So we need to again understand that how, again, I will bring out, reiterate the fact that metaphysical conceit in the metaphysical poetry is not a kind of an adornment as it is done in the Elizabethan poetry. But in the metaphysical poetry, we see that the conceit is used to persuade, it is used to convince, it is used to prove a point, and that is why it is also an argumentative poetry, right? Conceits, as I told you, are the instruments of definition in an argument, or an instruments to persuade, okay? So there's a lot of, it's very persuasive, it's very it's trying to always prove a point that this is what it is, and it goes to any length to do that, right? And I gave you an example of valediction forbidding mourning, where the lovers are compared with a pair of compasses, which is again highly unlikely, right? But why does the poet uses it, right? Why does he uses the image of compass? I circulated the note to you yesterday, and if you have those notes with you, you can read that here it's a valediction, and it's a time of bidding farewell, and the poet doesn't want his wife to be mournful, right? And similarly, presence and absence was also the same thing. The lovers were getting separated, and how the distance could have separated them. But on the contrary, Donne, in his usual style, takes all divest, distance with all his power and autonomy, and in fact just turns the table, and makes a point that it is far more enriching for the lovers, and for the love to be immortalized, in separation than it could have been in union. So yes, definitely, this is what we see. So in the valediction forbidding mourning also, we speak of a pair of compasses, yet the pair is just one thing, just as the two lovers are one. So the poet has to depart, and his beloved must stay back, and but she controls him, no matter where they go, no matter where they are. Just like the compass has two, angles to it, So, but here's the beloved who is in control. She's in the center, and she is kind of controlling the lover wherever he is. All right. What else do we know? We have delved quite in deep with the metaphysical conceit. Now, what else we really need to concentrate, what other things that we need to look into metaphysical poetry, is the fact that here you also see a lot of learnedness. I've been repeating it 100 times that metaphysical poetry is extremely intellectual. It seems like it is actually, it's not for the class, it's not for the masses, it is for the class. It is only for the people who can understand those references and those comparisons. Not everybody can, okay? So it demands a lot out of the reader. It's complicated, it's complex, the comparisons are not so easy. So you really have to understand the references, and if you do not, if you lose one line or something somewhere, you're lost completely, because it is so well woven. The argument is woven from the beginning till the last. So that learnedness, or the fact that it is highly intellectual, then emotional, right? So this is also one of the major striking aspects of metaphysical poetry. And Johnson commented when he said that, and I quote here, to say what they hoped had been never said before. That is why, they ransack nature and art for illustration, comparisons, and allusions. Dr. Johnson noted that the metaphysical poets sometimes actually draw their conceit from the recesses of the learning not very much frequented by the common readers of the poetry. And this is something that I have explained to you earlier, that you find the references of compass, or of all these things, which is just really the new developments taking place at that time. So whether it is in the field of navigation, exploration, new lands being discovered, so all these discoveries and exploration that were happening around, somehow they get inserted, or they get encapsulated in the poetry of metaphysical poetry. And they're certainly toying with these new ideologies, with these new images of looking at the world. So it is highly inventive, and it is highly, what should I say, a learned or intellectual poetry. So as I said, many people would think that it is not for the masses but for the classes. So you need to have a certain kind of a knowledge, in order to basically appreciate what the point has been proved, right? So then what else? So the sensibility is also something which has been talked about. That metaphysical poet are also part of the poetic sensibility. Okay, in fact, T.S. Eliot is being credited, with really bringing this about in the metaphysical poet. In fact, he wrote an essay which is called "The Metaphysical Poets," in which he says that when a poet's mind is perfectly equipped for its work, it is constantly amalgamating disparate experiences. The ordinary man's experience is very chaotic, it's very irregular and fragmented. And things are not so linear, they're not so organized, they're not so like in line. Things are in life, it doesn't happen like this. Things are like everything is like a big, what should I use a term, like a khichdi in your head. It's fragmented hai har cheez bahut zyada organized nahi hoti hai. And this is what he think is something that we actually get in the metaphysical poetry. So this is a point made by T.S. Eliot. Now I think my Zoom session is going to get over. It has already warned me that that my class is getting over. So before it does get over, I need someone to really take the attendance of all those who are present. I have 114 students. I hope what I taught today is clear. There are a few more elements of metaphysical poetry that I will discuss. Some of you, did you follow today's class? Can I have a response?
Yes, ma'am.
So only Arisha is the only one talking. What about the others?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I have a more euphoric, thoda sa, more heartening response? And then you all are just sleeping somewhere in the corner of your room, it seems. See, this is the reason why I would want all of you to switch on your videos. I think it is very important. You keep your audios off, but I want to see your videos to ensure your attendance. Otherwise, it's very difficult with your cameras and your microphones being off. I cannot decipher whether you're really part of the class or you're just somewhere, in another world, just connected through Wi-Fi. So, any questions so far? Has anyone, any question? Jatin, Sanaullah, Muhammad Sufyan, you joined me first. Tuba is here. Any question, anyone? Or whatever that has been discussed today? Was basically a lot has been revised from yesterday. No? All right, then I think we'll wrap up today with my Zoom session getting over, and I'm going to see you tomorrow, and we will continue with the metaphysical poets, because then I have 2 poets to do with you, and I think we'll straight away now, with so much of background knowledge and understanding of how conceit work, I think it would be just the right time for us to now pick up the text that we have with us. Right? All right? Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Why hasn't Malika joined the
Okay.
class? I really want Malika to join the class. She was my class representative. Please find out. I hope she's all right. How is she doing? Let me know. Okay? Now, who is going to have you taken a screenshot, the attendance? That's very important. So if I can just get everybody here, all the participants, and so, yeah, yes. So go to the view, go to the gallery. Okay. All right, everyone, take care. This would be the end of the class today, and I will see you tomorrow. Till then, take care, stay safe, okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
And wear your
Thank
masks, okay? Bye bye, everyone.
Bye, ma'am.